our Executive Assets Director. She's very kindly coming along to talk to us about sustainability and all the work that Broadland are doing. What we would ask is that everyone stays on mute while Louise presents. If you do have questions during her presentation, could you put them in the chat box and we'll pick them up at the end. Otherwise, once Louise is finished, we'll have questions then and you'll be able to put your hand up. Is that okay? All right, Louise, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Paula. Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us this evening. As Paula said, I'm going to cover sustainability this evening. It's just a little bit about me. As Paula said, I'm the Executive Asset Director, and I look after a lot of different areas in relation to service delivery, but also I have a big focus on sustainability. So just a little bit about the agenda that I'm going to cover this evening with you. Sustainability is a very wide subject. So I'm going to do a bit of a background around sustainability, sort of generally, and then kind of home in on specific areas such as our existing homes. Our existing homes, particularly those from social housing, they do represent approximately 14% of the carbon emissions. And it's estimated that there's 2.1 million housing association homes that need to have works carried out to them to meet the government targets by 2050. So that's an area that I will discuss as well. So a few kind of jargon definitions to start with. There's all these different things that are floating around, so I thought I'd just cover a few of them. So sustainability, it can mean different things for different people, but I suppose a general idea is that making sure that we use our resources efficiently at the moment so that they are still here in future years to come. ESG, you might have heard of this terminology as well. It's used quite a bit, particularly in our sector. It's environmental, and that's some of the areas it would cover. And that's probably the more, excuse me, just a minute, have a sip of water. That's probably the more commonly known area, when we look at sustainability around environmental factors. We also have the social factors and governance. So governance is looking at if you run the business in an ethical way. And actually, there's quite a lot of tie-ins to funding around looking at these metrics of ESG. So there's always talk about carbon. What is the fuss about carbon? Well, carbon emissions are given out when we burn things like fossil fuels. They are held in the atmosphere and they actually hold heat. So you may have heard previously about the greenhouse effect. So by those fossil fuels being burnt and the carbon in the atmosphere, the heat is heating up the planet more. And that's why we talk about carbon and why we measure carbon. There's also quite a bit of talk around net zero, zero carbon, carbon net, all these kind of things. And when you're looking to kind of measure your emissions, they do mean two different things. So you've got zero carbon, which means there's no carbon emissions at all. And then you have like a carbon neutral position or net zero carbon. And that's when you're looking at what your carbon emissions are, say from burning fossil fuels, but also what's called offsetting. So that's looking at other things that kind of balance that carbon off. And you may hear about some companies planting lots of trees and things like that to kind of offset carbon. So that net zero position is the balancing of those two factors. Something else which is commonly talked about is fuel poverty. And I know that it's not potentially a popular expression, however, it is something that is used as a form of measurement. And it's really about, I mean, there's quite a complicated way of calculating it all, but it's really about how people are impacted by what they have to pay for their heating consumption and electricity. So it's looking at whether the cost of that seriously impacts on the way that you live. And when we talk about things like moving to net carbon and looking at fuel costs for people at the moment don't necessarily mean the same thing. So that's something we will explore when we look into our carbon journey a bit more. So there's lots and lots of varying different targets and things set by the government. And this is just an overview of some of them, and it kind of explains why sometimes it's quite difficult to unpick what is actually meant by net zero carbon. So if the UK government's 10-point plan, which you may have heard about, we also have the Climate Change Committee, and this is where we've set the aim for net zero on all greenhouse gases by 2050. There's then the Paris Climate Agreement, which is focusing on global warming. There's then the Clean Growth Strategy. So this is looking at the Energy Performance Certificate of homes. So if you remember, that's a rating on our homes that can go from A to G, a bit like you have on fridges and things. And there's targets set out in there. For instance, this one, trying to get all homes to EBCC by 2030. And there's also various other things, such as this, which is this is a voluntary reporting standard for the social housing sector, looking at, again, your sustainability. And there's quite a few other different methods of measuring this. Again, some of these are tied in with funding opportunities as well. So focusing a bit more on existing homes. So our sector probably accounts for, within our homes, 14% of the UK carbon emissions. So that's why it's important to look at that and how we can reduce that further. Also thinking about fuel poor or fuel poverty. So it's looking to reduce the amount of fuel poor households. And this is some of those interim targets that have been set, which is the band of E by 2020, minimum band of D by 2025, and minimum band of C by 2030. And you can see there's a footnote there which says where practical, cost effective and affordable. And that is kind of the big question about what does that actually mean, and what do we do with homes which we can't get to those levels. And I'll share a bit further on about where we are on our journey on reaching these targets. In terms of new build, there's some kind of different targets in place and different focus. So around new build homes, that it's kind of regulated more by the building regulations, and you can see there's been targets put in for carbon reduction around our new build homes. There's also something called the Future Home Standard, which is looking at the focus for homes that are being built. And one thing that's key on that is that there won't be able to be any gas heating in new build homes from 2025. There's also further planning consultations and building regulations consultations looking at what other changes need to be made to new build. So looking at what Broadland's done so far. So kind of going back to, gosh, it must be 10 years ago now, time flies. We set up a group who we called Environmental Champions. And this was like a group of staff from across the whole organisation to kind of be ambassadors for sustainability. And what we wanted to do was to try to make the awareness across the whole organisation And it was really looking at trying to make it part of people's everyday job rather than a specific task. And it was thinking about small changes we could make that would have a big impact. And a lot of it was about how people could think about their impact in sustainability. And here's examples of some of the events we've run, about campaigns we've put in our magazine, on social media, in our website. We've done things like water saving awareness. You can see some examples there of some different things we've done, some focus on recycling, and we've done events for tenants and for staff as well. We also put in place some long-term sustainability targets, and sustainability is one of our corporate strategy strands as well. And these targets were set kind of before some of these interim performance government targets were in place. And we will be reviewing these, but this is what we'd set and we'd been on our journey to achieving. And these are based on 2050. So we would need to be at different places along the journey with the end goal of getting to the net zero carbon by 2050. And we were thinking about different areas, both with us as a business and also our homes. And so I'll just go through these so you can see some of the targets we set ourselves. And the average SAP of 86 we've got there, that is, it's another way of measuring energy performance, but it kind of basically equates to a high energy performance certificate of B. And that is kind of what we estimate to be net zero carbon by 2050. Although obviously a lot can change between now and 2050, but that is what is kind of its forecast to be at the moment. So what we should be aiming for. Okay. We've also put in place some measures, obviously, to see how we're doing. We've also had thoughts about if we have homes which we couldn't reasonably get up to our energy standard we wanted to, and we would look at when they become empty to potentially sell them and use the proceeds to improve the energy efficiency of other homes. We've also said that we will look at our journey to decarbonisation and also about building our new homes to high EPC standards. It's important to build to a high standard of new homes. However, we've got a lot of the existing homes in place at the moment. And that's why we need to kind of also focus on those to try, they will make the biggest impact because they're the homes that are already there, but also new homes, we don't want to build them to then have to do work to them in the near future. So it's kind of looking at that balance between new homes and our existing ones we have. For a number of years as well, I think we started in 2012, we joined this group called Shift. And it's basically an assessment and a benchmark of where we are, both on our journey to 2050 and also comparison to other organisations. And again, it covers a lot of different areas, and it helped really where our long-term sustainability targets came from originally. It looks at things like the waste management, the performance of our homes, our new builds, and how we kind of work with tenants to help them to live more sustainability and reduce their bills as well. As I said, we started this in 2050, and this is kind of where our ratings came on each year we carried out the assessment. So we started out on a bronze assessment. We then moved up to silver, and we got to our gold standard in 2016. and we've retained that gold standard until our last assessment we did, which was in 2020. And from now on, the assessment is going to be yearly, so we'll be preparing for the next assessment. So really, that was a really good thing to attain, to get to gold. And also, out for the past 3 years running, out of all of the associations that completed this assessment, we got the highest score. So that means that we are fairly ahead on our journey to get to that 2050 goal. Not sure if you can really see that too well, especially if you're on a small screen, but it gives some of the outputs on where we are from our sustainability assessment, the last one we did. And it shows it against what they call the platinum level, which is where we would need to be for 2050. So to get to that net zero carbon, we would need to get to platinum level and then keep at platinum level until 2050. So they didn't give out any platinum awards this year. I think it's quite a big ask to be at that level right now, but it's very good to get to gold regardless. So I said that I would let you know a bit about how we're going against those interim targets for the energy rating of our existing homes. So we've got 84% of our homes at an EPC C or above, which is really good news because that was that interim target for 2030. We do have some which don't reach that target, and that some of those are quite difficult. They come into those kind of, is it reasonable to do? For instance, are they in a planning area? Are they in a listed building? We had an issue recently where we wanted to replace some timber windows on people's homes, and the planner said, no, you can't replace the timber windows because this is a listed building. And it's that kind of balance between trying to raise the energy rating of our homes, but having to work within the planning restrictions. And so it's kind of like we're going to have that discussion at some point around what do we do? And it's not just us, it's going to be everyone. You can see there that this SAP rating, the national average is 65. For the sector is 68.4, and our average SAP rating is 73.4, which is like an average of an EPC C. So this graph on the right-hand side there, it shows you as we've gone through the years how many of each band of EPC we've got in our homes, and you can see quite a drastic improvement there on where we are. And there's a range of different things that we've done. We've concentrated on improving insulation for homes. That is really the best way. It doesn't require any like technology or anything. The house will just perform as it is with that structure. We have, I mean, you can't obviously insulate all homes that easily. For instance, if you need to provide, if you've got external solid walls and you want to, like in a Victorian terraced house, it would mean putting a lot of insulation on the outside. And again, we come up against planning requirements on that. So we have done some other measures. We've put solar panels on roofs of buildings. We've put photovoltaic panels as shown in the photograph there, and they're the panels which generate electricity. So if we're moving away from gas in the future, those kind of things would be very good because they help with the electric heating costs. We've also worked with some consultants to kind of map out all of our homes and where they are and how much it would cost to get them up to the levels we want to get them up to and what kind of things we would do. And this is this system called Chrome, which has now been renamed to Portfolio. And that's what we've used to kind of look at the data. And this kind of shows the scale of what it means to try to get to these targets. And when you multiply that across the whole of the sector, you can see the kind of financial figures we're looking at to do this work. And so the EPC high B is what we're saying by 2050 is the high net zero. So 35 million. These are approximate figures at the moment, but the system has kind of helped us model this to look at what we would need to do. So some of the things that we've done in our new homes. So this was the previous year. We'd increased how many homes we own and manage by 273. And we had made sure that they were still built to high EPC standards. We'd put other things in place that link to sustainability, such as the showers and taps, which are water saving, and also putting in place electric vehicle charging points so that we can be kind of future ready for those sort of things, looking at sustainable materials. And already we had that 2025 target to not be putting gas into new homes. So we've already started to move from that. So getting ready for alternative types of heating. So yes, so I mentioned about the kind of scale of the challenge financially to get to where we need to get to. So they're saying the estimated cost of taking a home to EPCC from EPCC, sorry, to zero carbon is about 20,000, although other figures I've seen say that it ranges from 40,000 to 60,000 because, of course, it depends on where everything is at the moment, where if it's already lower to get to the higher figure or whether your stock is already at a fairly energy efficient level. So, you know, it's quite a big challenge. So there are some funding opportunities that are available at the moment, although some of them are quite complicated and you kind of have to have projects ready to just dive in and take advantage of the funding at the time that it arrives. There's also balancing with investment in energy efficiency and sustainability and in reducing carbon, but also needing to build our new build program and supply new homes, and also doing things such as still replacing bathrooms and kitchens. So it is quite a juggling act, and there's not really certainty at the moment on long-term funding. There's kind of various pockets, but you can see from the figures that there is going to need to be funding to support this, because we just wouldn't be able to do it and do everything else that we need to do as well. So there are a few kind of pots that are there, and we are exploring all of these at the moment. The energy company obligation scheme is one that we are working through with Eon, I think it is, to try to make an application. The thing that we come across quite often is because our homes are at a fairly high energy performance level, that sometimes precludes us from applying for the funding because they want to work on the EFs and Gs, the lower rated ones. And sometimes as well, because our homes are not all in neat little terraces, and they're sometimes harder to work on because we've got more rural schemes, that sometimes works against us as well. But we are looking at opportunities. The Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is a bit of a mouthful, that's listed there, we have made applications because the applications for those are through the local authority. So I think about 5 different local authorities we're working with at the moment, and trying to see if we can get some funding. So the road to net zero carbon, you can see some of the figures there about how many homes would need to be fitted. A recent survey from the NHF, though, has said that social housing outperforms other tenures in terms of this journey. And we've already we've looked at our long-term sustainability targets as Broadland, but now we need to turn to think more about this road to net zero and maybe focusing more on our carbon journey and what it means for everyone, really. So we're looking at our plan. We've got some sessions with leadership group, we've got a board workshop, and what we're looking at, what our priorities are, what we want to focus on, what it means for us. Is it carbon at cost of everything else, or is it that we want carbon but we also want new homes, we also want a big focus on, understandably, fire safety? And so we're all going to work together to understand what that is. And also there's a need to I think, raise awareness with our staff first, and then to work with tenants as well and find out what would be important in terms of delivery. There's going to be future technologies come out that we don't know about yet. We have taken advantage of some technologies recently, such as the switchy devices, which you can see on the slide there, and they are kind of like smart thermostats. We've rolled out about 200 so far, and we're putting more into people's homes, and these kind of learn what people's behaviours are and will then automatically adjust the heating in the home to suit what how the tenant lives and how they would like to have their comfort levels. It also does other smart things, like it measures moisture in the home, it measures how quickly it cools down, so that we can get warnings that there may be an issue there. We can also remotely test the heating system, so we can find out before everyone puts their heating on, say in November, that there could be issues with that heating system, so we can send someone out to mend it before someone then puts the heating on and realizes their heating doesn't work. So they've proved to be quite useful. And so there's other things like that that's going to come along. In addition, as there's a big drive to move to electric heating, it's looking at the actual electricity supply. Is that going to be less fossil fuel led? Is that going to be more from wind? And is the cost of electric heating going to change? Is the cost of fossil fuel heating going to change? And it's all these kind of questions and things that will come out as we go on this journey. So in terms of a conclusion, really, and I understand I've covered quite a lot, so hopefully it's been useful to give you an insight into some of our priorities in terms of Broadland and where we are with our journey. Social housing is ahead of other housing in terms of this journey, and actually Broadland is ahead of a lot of other social housing providers, as we can see from our results from our benchmarking comparisons. However, there's quite a lot to do until 2050, and some of those targets are not that far away, even though it might seem it. There's a lot of kind of preparatory work to be done now. Great, and thank you, and we can move to questions.
Thanks, Louise. There isn't actually any questions